You are listening to I'll Follow You, a podcast about creative process and what really goes on behind the scenes of an artistic life. My name is Allison Felis, and I love talking to musicians, writers, visual artists, and other brilliant thinkers about their working methods, obsessions, and pet projects. Guess what? Just by tuning in, you're part of the inner circle now. Today on I'll Follow You, I'm super excited to share my recent conversation with author and journalist Saga Briggs. If you're listening to this on the day that the episode initially goes live, Saga's first book will officially be published tomorrow, Tuesday, September 19th. It's called How to Change Your Body, The Science of Interoception and Healing Through Connection to Yourself and Others. And as you'll hear me enthusiastically state kind of throughout the chat, I really think everyone should read it. Beyond the book, she's written articles for Scientific American, Aeon+Psyche, and DoubleBlind magazine, and has worked as an editor for both the Mind European Foundation for Psychedelic Science and the digital magazine Inform Ed. She grew up in the Pacific Northwest, but is currently based in Berlin. In our chat today, we talk about the fact that her book secretly functions as a document of living through the early days of the COVID pandemic, truth-seeking and how language sometimes gets in the way of that, nerding out about our shared love of Annie Dillard, enhanced body trust through learning to give and receive Reiki, being non-judgmental toward our own emotions, and what it might look like if we as a society get to a point where we're asking each other, what are you feeling, rather than how are you feeling? For links to the book and more information about the other key people and topics mentioned in our conversation, you can check out the show notes at my website, queenofpeaches.com. And now, my conversation with Saga Briggs. Saga Briggs, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, it's so good to be here.
So before we start, I will say the name of your book, which is How to Change Your Body, and everyone needs to read it. I am obsessed with it, and I'm not just saying that because I do happen to work at the publisher that has published it. This is not like SponCon. No one is paying me to do this. This is of my own love of you and your book and your ideas and the wisdom that you're bringing through this book. It's just really mind-blowing. The whole process of reading it and working on it editorially, it was just amazing, and I just want everyone to read it. So I want to congratulate you upon the publication of this book, because I think it's really huge and going to be really influential. And I just am happy that it's in the world. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it really means a lot to hear that, honestly. And yeah, I have to say I'm in a very surreal space at the moment. Just realizing that it's actually physically out in the world. Next week, actually, right? Yeah, 19th, which is wild.
Yeah, coming out, and I will put links in the show notes so that everyone can click on it and buy a physical copy, download an ebook, whatever their choice is, so that everyone can read it and love it and enjoy it. And I also have to tell the story that, so you and I have mostly worked together online, but we got a chance to physically meet in Denver at the Psychedelic Science conference in 2023. And I did put one copy of your book in the hands of Mr. Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind.
Amazing.
And I was like, hey buddy, how's it going? I rushed over to him right before his signing started. I was so obnoxious. And I was like, hey, check this out. Would you like a coffee? And he was like, yeah, I'll take one. Thanks. So I was shook his hand, and I was like, have fun at the signing, man. Take care. So somewhere out there, Michael Pollan, if you're listening, we hope you enjoyed Saga's book, because you started the ball rolling, and then Saga picked it up and ran with it in her own unique direction.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great story. And yeah, a playful nod to his title, which, I feel like all of the research that I did on interoception, over the years, kind of really made this embodied component of experience like just so significant to me. And at the same time, like his book was a huge influence on me, I have to say, and like really kicked things off in 2018 in a way that, you know, I wouldn't have come out with this book if not for his book. So like so much gratitude to him for everything that he's done for the movement as well.
So yeah, why don't you tell a little bit about the book itself, and then also specifically this term interoception, which I feel like, you know, part of what's so amazing about your book is that you're really bringing this term into the mainstream. Like I know it's out there in the research and in the clinical findings, but as far as bringing interoception to the mainstream, I feel like you're really kicking it off. It's definitely the first time I had heard the term, and reading about it again in your book was so like a million light bulbs all the time. Like, oh, of course, this is why I feel this way in this situation, and this makes so much sense in what I've experienced with my own sense of anxiety and disconnection and everything. So yeah, like let us have your thumbnail sketch of how you're defining those things and how you're describing your book these days.
Yeah, so I think like a really basic definition of interoception would be that it's the sense of the body from within, which is a pretty fundamental place to start. So that's everything from hunger and thirst, like very basic physiological signals, to emotion. So like feeling joy and anger, but also all the way up to like feeling, you know, how you feel about your life in your body. I think that's also, at least within my own definition. So like some of these more abstract kind of senses or feelings, I think also fit within that umbrella. And yeah, I mean, the term itself has been around for a century or so. It's really like actually not new, but yeah, the science has really picked up in the last couple of decades. And especially like as we kind of move into this more like in the space of embodied cognition and realizing the importance of that in neuroscience. And then also, you know, the situation we're in with mental health treatment and how a lot of the traditional treatments and the medical model is kind of failing us at present. This kind of, yeah, it offers a really interesting alternative perspective on mental health in general and how it's related to awareness or lack of awareness of bodily signals. And yeah, the research is saying people differ a lot in whether they can feel bodily signals and also how strongly they can feel them, and how that relates to a wide variety of different conditions, from anxiety to PTSD to OCD to depression, like anything you can name, basically. So yeah, it's pretty relevant to the time that we're in. And yeah, I think when I discovered it, there was this light bulb moment for me of like, no one has brought it into this space for the general public yet, and it's time for that. So that's kind of that was the impetus in the beginning.
Yeah, and so the book is, yeah, sort of goes through sort of like crises of interoception, and then ways that it's been shown, again, like clinically and scientifically, that it will ways to heal through interoception, like various issues that people have, and then sort of give it, you know, I love that at the end there's like, here's ways that you can just do it now in your life, you know, the practices that you can check into. So is that like a fair summation of sort of the journey of the book and how you wanted to structure it to sort of lead people through the efficacy of what it can do in your life?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I struggled with that a little bit. There was tension in me because there aren't answers. There are not clear answers yet. Yeah, it's still a pretty new field. And so I felt like, yeah, I really want to leave people with something practical and hands-on that they can apply, because life is short and we really like do need, I think, some hope in these small ways. And yeah, at the same time, I didn't want to kind of be preemptive in any kind of like conclusion. that's not backed by research. So I was sort of like straddling this line of, okay, what do we know so far? Mindfulness seems to really help, for example. There's research on that. And yeah, at the same time, not be afraid of like drawing on my own experience and kind of sharing what's worked for me. Yeah, just making sure that people know that this is kind of a suggestion, and it's sort of a starting place to start thinking about some of these concepts in new ways.
Well, so speaking of your own experience, like I would love to hear more about, yeah, just like the writing process and your journey to writing this book. Cause it's like, I know that you started off as like a creative writing major and like, you know, and now you're like deep in the science and like, you know, studied in London and have a, you know, postgrad degree in some deep, intense like science writing. And so how did that connect together over the years for you?
Yeah, I mean, I did study creative writing, you're correct. So like initially my focus was poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction,
Which
and
makes sense because
psychology.
you are a beautiful writer. I mean, again, like, you know, we're talking all this like heavy science stuff, but your writing is so beautiful and so accessible and like just beautifully punctuated throughout with your own journey, again, of using interoception and sort of getting in touch with your body. In various ways. So I just want to interject that is that like this is also like a beautiful book. I mean, not only is it necessary information, it's also just like a joy to read because it's so lovely.
Thank you. That's really sweet to say. Yeah, I mean, I think that there was definitely a like a creative writing sensibility in me when I sat down to start writing it. But yeah, at the same time, I mean, I moved into science writing pretty fast in my career because that seems to be what pays or did at the time. And I really enjoyed it. I loved like the science communications aspect of it and kind of taking like dense research and relaying it for an audience in a way that's like actually digestible. So yeah, and then also I think I'm really interested in this kind of tension between the arts and the sciences, and how they interact, like this sort of intersection of the two. And so yeah, I think the way that I structured the book was kind of deliberate in that sense, to kind of combine like this more creative approach of adding the personal narrative and you know, kind of a maybe more poetic language than what people are used to reading from, you know, kind of like denser literature, and combining that with the science writing. So yeah, I think hopefully both of those elements come through, because that was very deliberate, kind of trying to meld the two.
Which I think is it's so reflective of, again, the content of the book itself. I mean, in terms of there is this tension at play in interoception of your mind and your body and trying to bring them together. And so, I mean, it almost makes sense that there's this, these sort of two sides of the writing itself, where it's, yeah, the emotional aspects and the personal aspects combined with the research and the hard science and, you know, yeah, really digging in with like, you know, people who are just in the field. And like, I wish I just have my digital copy on my reader. But so I don't have a physical copy of the book in front of me, but I forget which researcher it was where you asked her a question and she was like, I don't want to go on the record to even speculate about that. She's like, it's so new. There's like so many ways that the research could go. She was like, I can kind of hazard a guess, but I'm not sure. And so that's also like really thrilling that you were able to like get these people who are sort of in their own way just as deep in it as you are, in terms of sort of bringing it into your life. It's like these people are bringing it into being through the research in a way, again, that's like super cutting edge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, one sort of tricky thing that I did when I was talking to a lot of them is ask them about their perspective on psychedelics, which a lot of them were not psychedelic researchers. And I think that threw some of them off, because they you know, they didn't feel qualified to speak on psychedelic science being like interoception researchers, for example. But I wanted to see what would happen, you know? And I think that threw things into a really interesting space sometimes where people were, they were forced to kind of speculate in interesting ways. And yeah, like I think that's really important, like using our imaginations, even if there's not hard data necessarily to back it up. Like, I think it's really important to keep this creative space open. So yeah, it was such a joy to put that part together, like all of these interviews and like really amazing organic process of connecting with all of them. And that, yeah, I mean, that was probably my favorite part of putting the book together was speaking with all of these people.
Because that's the other thing that's I was finding as I was like rereading the book in preparing to chat with you today. It's such a document of early COVID time too. And so like that's this additional fascinating layer where it's like you're writing and interviewing people on Zoom, like through the first waves of lockdowns. And so it was this sort of, God, yeah, I don't even know how to explain the experience when I was really like locking in on that aspect of it. Like I said, on this recent reread that I was like, wow, there's so much about vulnerability like in the book and becoming vulnerable to your own self. But I also feel like there was a vulnerability just in that time when none of us knew what was happening and we couldn't really leave our houses and couldn't relate to people in ways outside. And we were trying to find ways to connect. And so, yeah, writing about connection while we were also disconnected. I don't know. It's just a really fascinating document of that moment. Like, is that like, what's your memory of like going through that, like as you were doing these Zoom interviews with people?
Yeah, I'm glad you point that out. Like, I think that's a really important feature of the book and was completely coincidental. Like the timing, I just sort of got interested in the topic of connection and how the body plays a role in connection. Like right before, like basically January 2020, I began kind of the rabbit hole process of researching this topic, and then everything shut down the month after that. And yeah, I think February 2020 was when I interviewed Karen and Andy, who are amazing interoception researchers. And that moment of connecting with them, on the eve of the pandemic, that kind of sparked the whole thing. I really connected with them and I felt some sort of internal, like something open up, and they were really supportive of the project. Yeah, and initially I interviewed them just for an article, actually, and that article developed into the book itself, actually.
Is that the Psyche article? Or which one is that?
That's the one that was published by the Mind Foundation. So that's about social interoception. And once I published that, I just realized, oh my God, there's so much more, way more than one article. And yeah, I think at some point during that year, I realized, okay, this is actually like this disconnection we're all feeling is actually something to dig into. And yeah, just very ironic and very timely. And so I think at some point in every conversation, we're sort of discussing the topic of connection and what it means to each person. And yeah, so there's sort of this like hovering kind of uncertainty, I think, from section to section. But also, yeah, I mean, just on a personal level, like these conversations got me through, a big portion of that year. So yeah, I think I wanted the book to be about connection, but also there to be sort of this meta approach of like, I am connecting with people while I'm putting this together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really kind of hoped that would come through.
Because yeah, and that's another thing that I think is so that I love about the science of interoception and the term and the usefulness of it is that it's within and without. It's not just internal and it's not just external. It's both and I love the spectrum that's on, as far as like, yeah, relating to yourself, but then like relating to others. Like I as a teenager, like did a lot of musical theater in high school, and the researcher who talks about dance, and how dance as a ritual, I mean, throughout time and throughout civilizations, is this great unifier in terms of sort of people being able to relate to each other when they're dancing together. And I think about like the fact that 5 of my best friends are people that I danced with, multiple times a week for, 3-4 years, in that, key teenage time when your brain is sort of baking and coming together, and I'm like, oh, of course, this makes sense that, that's why I stay connected to these people. I mean, we've obviously cultivated the relationships, subsequently, but that's where it germinated. And I was like, oh, and again, and that's so much what I love about your book, is that like the answers, like, they're just so apparent, like when the way that you describe them and the way the researchers sort of like lay them out, it's just like, oh, of course, this is why I feel this way when I meditate, when I take MDMA, when I'm dancing, when I'm singing with other people. So anyway, yeah, just beautiful, beautiful research. And yeah, the fact that it's, yeah, also reminds us of this time, in this time when we needed connection, the fact that, you were talking and thinking about connection and what are the mechanics of that, is, yeah, what a gift. Because I think a lot of people, there's going to be some amnesia. It's already happening about like what COVID was really like. And your book is going to stand as this like document saying like, no, this is what it was like. It was kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, even for myself, it was 3 years ago I was putting it together. So it does seem like quite a long time ago. But as I go back and read passages, it comes back viscerally for me, actually, because I think because I was writing about, the embodied experience of it, which is kind of interesting. It's like if you're paying attention to your body, as you're encoding an experience in the first place, then later on when you're sort of retrieving it, bringing it back into memory, it's kind of easier because I think you have that like embodied connection to it even more strongly. But yeah, I found it just really fascinating, kind of the creative ways people were coming up with to stay connected as well during that time. And yeah, I mean, I went to a couple like Zoom dance club events over here, which of course were not the same exactly as, normal Berlin ecstatic dance event in person, but pretty good substitute. And like quite amazing, honestly, that we were able to stay to like sustain that feeling of connection just through a screen. Like that is quite incredible, I think. And yeah, I think I'm still like processing all of it and thinking of kind of new definitions all the time of what connection means to me. But yeah, it feels like almost like a window opened in time and this book, kind of came forth and then closed. And so it's very like well preserved in time, kind of like you were saying. So yeah, that's really interesting that you noticed that too. That's sort of like a preserved moment in 2020. Yeah.
Well, so diving back into that preserved moment, I mean, so what was the writing process like for you? Because again, it was, you were doing a lot of the research and a lot of the interviews during initial waves of COVID. And then, the thing that, as a writer myself and an editor, like I'm curious about that bifurcation between body and mind, because it's like I do go into that like brain in a jar mode, when I'm editing or when I'm writing or when I'm like hyper focusing on like, I got to get through these pages or I got to write this thing or whatever. And to be specifically writing about being in touch with your body while you're writing and editing, like how did you thread that needle just personally?
Not very well, honestly. Like it was brain in a jar for me, I think too, but I don't know. I mean, it's funny because when you're working on something that's really inspiring, at least for me, I feel like there was a synergy with my body anyway. Like I felt this openness during the whole project, and kind of knew that it was, the right project to be working on. So that felt embodied in a way. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of screen time. It was a lot of, yeah, research, lots of research rabbit holes for sure. But yeah, I mean, it was as embodied as it could have been considering the circumstances, I think, in terms of connecting with people. And yeah, it's interesting. Like, I do recall being sort of envious of people who had hobbies that were not writing during this time, because yeah, like, I mean, writers are very mental people, and we're using words all the time, and it can be very cognitive, very cerebral. And so I remember being sort of like envious of this friend who was like doing knitting projects, and that's how she was connecting and staying embodied during lockdown. So yeah, that was sort of on my mind, but I couldn't do anything about it. It was like this impulse, I had to get it out. And so the whole process itself, to answer your question, there was just a lot of flow to it. Like, the whole thing flowed from beginning to end. Yeah. And I guess looking back, that's one form of an embodied experience, like having that experience of that much flow over time. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but
no, absolutely it does. And that's also a question that I'd had too, because it's like this stuff is also current, and so you saying that, like, yeah, it flowed. I mean, that really sort of, again, makes sense hearing you say that, because it's just like, the book is out now. It's late 2023. We sent it to the printer, earlier this spring, summer, and this information is all really fresh. And so, yeah, it must have happened really fast. I mean, what was the turn time from like writing the original article where you were talking to Karen and Andy, and then suddenly being like, hey, guess what? I have a book manuscript. I'm pitching it to Synergetic Press. Like, what was that? What was that timeline even?
yeah, it did happen super fast, actually. So the article was written in March 2020, and then I wrote a series of articles and essays after that for like a period of maybe 5 months. And those kind of actually ended up being threaded together into a book. So a lot of the book actually was like separate essays initially. But those kind of came like during the pandemic, like during lockdown. I would say I was writing like one per week. And then the interviews happened mostly in the fall of 2020, in pretty quick succession. So yeah, I would say putting the whole thing together didn't take more than 6 months, which is pretty wild.
That's huge. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So yeah, there was just this sense of urgency. And, I also had the luxury of having the time. I feel like pretty blessed and privileged to have even had that time to put it together during 2020. Yeah, so I think in 2021, that was when I was sort of putting it out there, trying to put it out there into the world, and heard back in early 2022 from Synergetic. So yeah, there was a kind of long period of time where it was sort of, trying to find a home in the world. And I am so glad that it found Synergetic, and just seemed like perfect timing as well, because the interception field is sort of on the verge of reaching mainstream awareness right now. I think it's hopefully going to be like in mainstream parlance, like people will understand this term outside of like yoga circles, hopefully pretty soon. And so yeah, and then also I think that psychedelic science is in a really interesting time, going through an interesting period as well, of like moving into a more embodied space. And honing in on a greater focus on somatics too. So yeah. So 3 years is the answer to your question. 3 years from start to finish.
That's just incredible. I mean, that's so fast. I mean, I just know people who labor, for years and years and years. And obviously, I've heard of people who write quickly too and are able to be to get stuff out pretty fast. But yeah, I'm super admiring, and also we were talking before I hit record about our similarities and our overlaps in our astrological charts, and we have to look up what was happening in Gemini and Scorpio during that time, because 2022 was when I began my journey in interviewing with Synergetic as well. So we were both coming on board at the same time, which is kind of interesting. But
that's super funny.
We really fought. I mean, when we were kicking around ideas just behind the scenes for what the subtitle was going to be, we really fought to keep the word interoception in there, because I'm just going to read the subtitle. It's The Science of Interoception and Healing Through Connection to Yourself and Others is the full subtitle that we landed on for this book. And we were defending to, various, our distributor and other people who sort of were helping us hone in on what the right subtitle is going to be. It's like, we have to use the word interoception, because this is the landmark book. Like, this is going to be the big mainstream first time that term is so prominent. And we're like, want to help Saga sort of plant her flag in the sand here and say, like, yeah, let's do it. Like, interoception, this is something that everyone should be aware of. So I'm glad that we're able to help you bring that term more into the mainstream and really be unapologetic about it.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I think a lot of people have kind of glimpsed the title and thought that it was introspection, which is an easy mix up. But yeah, you're right. I think it's a really great time to kind of have more foundational texts that are reaching mainstream awareness on this topic. Yeah, Kelly Maller, who I interviewed, she was joking that the day that spell check doesn't try to correct interoception when she's writing an article, that will be the day that we've all won,
Yeah. No, that's such a great, perfect observation. Yeah, it's rather than the F-bomb, we want interoception in the spell check. Yeah.
Exactly.
In our texts through our iPhones and everything. So just backing up a little bit to, again, the psychedelic research that you were talking about, say a little bit more about how that all fits in, because I sort of feel like, Synergetic is very known for writings on psychedelics, and, have Stan Grof's books and, Sasha Shulgin's books. And so, for this very body-based book to also be referencing psychedelics. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear you chat more about, how you bring that piece of the puzzle into this area of study.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that anecdotally and based on the research, there's just a lot of accounts of people having experiences of feeling greater connection to their bodies under a wide range of different psychedelics. I think probably people would be most familiar with MDMA being an entactogen. So you have this touching within, that sort of experience, but also, ketamine, you oftentimes have sort of dissociation. And that's a really common experience people have when they're going through therapy. And I think that there's a lot of conversation around psychedelics and somatics. And the importance of the somatic component to the therapeutic benefits. But we're really just entering into the research on the two of those together. So, I mean, in terms of interoception itself, there have been a couple of studies. There was one study on salvia and body trust, because body trust is one facet of interoception, and I think this was back in 2015. This group of researchers found that at moderate doses, salvia could enhance body trust in people. So that was specifically focused on interoception and psychedelics. And there's been a few other studies since then as well, but we're kind of on the eve of it. Like, I feel like this is going to become a pretty important intersection, especially considering the fact that, altered bodily awareness is a transdiagnostic factor for so many mental illnesses, so many conditions. And if psychedelics are, also have this transdiagnostic healing potential, there has to be some sort of connection there.
Right.
So, yeah. And then if you look at, the work of Rosalind Watts, who she was previously at Synthesis, she's a clinical psychologist. She studies psychedelics and connectedness. And a lot of her work kind of, suggests that there's an embodied component to self-connection and connection to others and connection to the greater world when people are having these really therapeutic experiences on psilocybin. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the research is sort of like just ramping up. For example, I think there were 2 talks at the MAPS conference, maybe related to somatics. So it's really, I really hope to see more, honestly, in this area. And that's one of the messages of the book, is that this is important. And I mean, that's not to ignore any other area of study of like the mechanics of therapeutic mechanisms, but I'd just really like to bring this into focus more. And that's what I hope the book achieves in part.
Yeah. And it's so great that, this is coming out, the same time I just read Rachel Newer's book, the I Feel Love about MDMA, and just, getting studies out there, of people saying, there's, I mean, it's such a trite thing to say, but like, it's more than just a party drug, and like, which is not to say that like there can't be beautiful healing that happens, in a party context, but also, the mechanism of what's happening with these substances is just, it's not untapped in the sense that people haven't experienced it, but untapped in the sense of sort of the mainstream acceptance of it and the clinical awareness of what's happening, and the changing the fear around it for some people, because those, the stories of like, oh my God, I did Molly once and now I can never feel an emotion ever again. It's like, well, it's not really true. It's kind of urban legend, I mean, you can do a lot. I guess you can do a lot of it. I mean, I guess Anne Shulgin talked about there was a certain point towards the end of her life when it wasn't really doing anything for her anymore, but she had done quite a bit of it, I think.
A rare breed.
Yeah. A rare breed. Yes. A totally different sort of circumstance in her experience. So, well, I mean, we've been talking so much about the science. And so as a writer, like, do you consider yourself like a science writer? I mean, again, we were talking about this combination of sort of like the poetry and the lyricism in your writing, but like, how do you define yourself as a writer? If you have a definition for yourself as a writer?
I think day to day, I don't, like, in my head, it's like, I just write. And what I write about changes all the time. But I mean, I think I identify as a journalist mostly. And a lot of what I do is science writing, but a lot of the journalism I've done has not been related to the sciences at all. So I mean, I've kind of have experience across the board in a lot of different areas. But I mean, for this book, like I would actually categorize it as creative nonfiction.
Hell yeah.
And
I would agree.
I mean, that was sort of deliberate to try to create this hybrid, like personal narrative, science writing and interviews, try to combine those three different genres. So maybe that's a reflection of like how I identify as a writer myself. Like, sort of a bit of everything. But yeah, I mean, I think I like to identify as a journalist when I'm speaking to people, mostly just because, yeah, I love hearing people's stories, and I love kind of this process of going out into the world and connecting with people, and trying to seek some semblance of the truth, which also is in the realm of science. I think there's like an overlap there in terms of truth seeking. And also I'm fascinated by the way that language gets in the way of that sometimes. So yeah, I think my hope is to just communicate like as clearly as possible, where the research is at currently, and also give people an experience at the same time, if that's possible. So yeah, I think oftentimes when I'm reading, at least for me personally, when I'm reading a research article, I don't feel much necessarily. So yeah, I think I was trying to kind of achieve both of those things if possible.
Well, and again, you split the difference in a really great way between sort of like the dryness of like sort of straight up science writing, which that's a whole other question in itself. It's like, yeah, how you even like found a lot of this. I mean, I know that like there's, journals and stuff that you can comb through, but I'm always fascinated by like, where does people come across this research? But also so you split the difference between sort of like the dryness of science writing, but then also like, I feel like sometimes in like more pop science writing, it can be, the information can be like presented as like a foregone conclusion. Like sometimes you read books that are like can be advocating for something, but that it's like there's no sometimes if you're reading like summations of research or something, it can get to be this point where it's like, oh, well, of course, it's the end of the chapter is going to be like, yeah, and so this is a good thing, the end, it's like, yeah, and so this works for this aspect of, healing mental illness or healing a PTSD, where it can be like, okay, and so there's no, I don't want to say there's no mystery, but just like, yeah, advocacy can get boring. Whereas like you really delve into the mystery of it and the currentness of it, where it's, even though you're, positive on the research and are saying that it's a good thing for people to look into, there's also, you're able to still stay in that, or sort of write through it in a way that, presents the information almost as you're discovering it, like where it's not just like you've pre-digested it and you're sort of like regurgitating your own logic. It's you're able to convey it in a way where the reader is sort of with you in the path of discovery along the way.
Yeah, that's kind of you to say. And it definitely felt that way. I think that was deliberate as well. Yeah. Especially in the connection section. Yeah, because it was a process. I would say actually, I mean, going through the research and learning about interoception was so fulfilling for me personally, and answered, so many of the questions that I had about mental health that, yeah, I mean, it felt like unraveling a mystery to me as well as I was writing it. And yeah, I hope that comes across, that it's sort of a journey that I'm taking, that I'm inviting readers into. And it really did happen in real time.
Yeah.
Like I hope that comes across. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
So do you have like writing role models that like other people who achieve that sort of vibe in their writing, or are you sort of a person who's more inspired by other creative disciplines, or is it again both and is it a combination of things?
Yeah. Probably the most influential writer I can think of like throughout my entire life is Annie Dillard.
Oh, yes!
I read a lot of her.
Thank you. I don't know what page it's on, but again, I was like Annie Dillard ? That's so I'm a huge Annie Dillard fan too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I read a bunch of her stuff when I was 14, and Oh my God, I don't even know where to begin. Like her connection to nature was huge for me. The nature writing she did, but really like her use of language just blew my mind, and the way that she just on very basically on a sentence level can use verbs and action to really like enliven a sentence. And she also has this kind of economy of communication, which is just, it feels like she's not wasting any words. Yeah, and she's also a science communicator. A lot of her work is really researchy, but without being dense. Somehow I feel like she always pulls it back to this personal, grounded moment that's, right in front of her. Like I'm just remembering there's like a fish in a goldfish bowl in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek that she writes about for like 10 pages. And there's so much research and science also woven through that, but with this like very grounded image. And yeah, a lot of her work is just so poetic. So she was a huge influence on me. And yeah, I mean, I think probably Joan Didion. I think a lot of people I've just absorbed through osmosis over the years, and I couldn't like actually, say that this person influenced me in a particular way. But aside from writers, I would say music also plays a huge part in my writing process. There's always some album I'm listening to that like sustains a mood throughout pretty much the whole project, which sounds, like slightly crazy to be playing the same album over and over again for like one article. But it really, yeah, somehow opens something up inside where I feel like, I just hit the right note in terms of like mood or tone, and I can just sustain that. So when I was writing this book, I was listening to Andrew Bird.
Nice.
And
Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah, I figured you might know him.
Yeah.
William Tyler, who's a folk singer, American folk singer. And Joni Mitchell, like some of her really early stuff.
Yeah.
So
I mean, God, like who better to like put you in touch with your body than Joni, where you're just gonna feel every ounce of emotion like coursing through your veins.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Are you a musician yourself?
I studied piano for 7 years, classical piano.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting because it was all Suzuki method. So it was all sort of like learned through memory, and I didn't really learn how to read music. It was all just like memorized. And so I sort of have a sense memory for a few songs now, but like, yeah, mostly it's all gone, which is a bit sad. But I'm sure if I like sat down in front of a piano and started feeling it out, it would come back. But yeah, music was a huge part of the process of this book for me, and tends to be for my writing in general. And it doesn't have to be related like topically or like thematically to whatever I'm writing. It's just that kind of inexplicable, like this is the right mood, the right setting to work with.
So do you actually listen to have the music on while you're writing, or is it just sort of ambiently in your life during the period of time when you're composing?
Yeah, while I'm writing.
Wow.
For sure. Yeah. Which is not the same, if I'm writing for work, if it's something like, I don't know, writing like copywriting or writing something that I get paid for some reason. The music is distracting to me. Sure. And like I really need to like focus. But yeah, I derive a lot of like creative inspiration when I'm working on a creative project from whatever music I'm listening to.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, because I know, some people like my husband, when he's writing, he's an academic, and he has to do instrumental music, so it's like he can't do anything with words, so there's like, a lot of jazz, he'll listen to sort of I'm even trying to think who he's into right now, but either jazz or classical, or well, he teaches English at a community college, and so when he's grading, there's often like classical music, or he'll go big into like Brian Eno's like ambient album as well. He's grading, Stars at the Lid were big for a while over here, but yeah, but then during the off hours, then it's like Van Halen.
That is amazing.
So totally changing the subject. I forgot to ask you when I was sort of sending prep questions, but I want to nerd out too about Reiki. I know you're a Reiki practitioner. Like, how did that come to your life? How does that fit into your writing? Like, do you like Reiki your computer before you sit down?
That's such a good idea.
Right?
Just plants and animals.
Nice.
Mostly. But yeah. Great question. I'm trying to remember exactly how it came into my life. I think I was just experimenting with different healing modalities a few years ago, and I signed up for a treatment first, and then I got interested in actually learning Reiki from a Reiki master here in Berlin. And I completed 2 levels. And I would say like the biggest thing I got out of it was body trust, like enhanced body trust in a way that I did not expect, but was really powerful. And I think what was kind of so significant about it was that it forced me to just be in this really receptive space.
Yeah.
So paying attention to the body, you have your hands on different parts of your body from head to toe as you're going through a session. And there's no you're not demanding anything from your body. You're not really like using your body in any way. You're just paying attention to the sensations as you attend to them. And so like being forced back into that space of like this very bottom up sensory, I don't have any preconceived notions or thoughts about these feelings. They're just sensations, just the pure sensations. That was so powerful. And put me in the space of being non-judgmental towards feeling and emotion, which I think you can also get from different types of meditation. But Reiki for me, really, I mean, there's that body component immediately. Like you really are relating to your body from the first day. And so, yeah, I very vividly remember like one night I was going to meet up with some friends, and this was in early January 2020, and I had just gone through a 21-day self-treatment of Reiki, and I was feeling a little bit anxious to meet up with these people. And it just dawned on me that I could trust my body. Like I didn't have to calm down before I went into the situation. I could actually trust my body when I was already at the event in the situation, to kind of just regulate itself, like bring itself back to homeostasis on its own. And that blew my mind. Like I really had never considered that kind of close, trusting relationship with my body before. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with like calming down before you go into a stressful situation. But for me personally, it felt like it wasn't, the trust could be deepened a level by just diving in.
Wow.
And like paying attention moment to moment, what was going on inside without judgment. That was really huge for me. Like I still use that every day. So yeah, I don't practice Reiki as regularly as I did in the past, but I got this enormous benefit from it at the time. So highly recommend to anyone to try it out if they haven't.
Yeah, I have Reiki, like I'm Reiki master and attunement, and yeah, same thing. It's just like, yeah, if I'm in bed, and it's like, okay, there was a lot going on today, it's like you put your hands on, and it's amazing that that's all you have to do, and you just get out of your way and let it be there. And more often than not, like I am asleep before I even take my hands off, it's like, it really, especially like foot right on the crown of the head. You're like, oh, there it goes. Okay, good.
Yes.
And again, and not in the sense of like forcing anything, but just in a come back home, come back, be here in your physical self. Like I've actually been having a similar journey with EFT, with tapping. Like I'd learned it a number of years ago and was kind of like, it's not doing anything for me. And I've been doing more of it recently and have really, had some wonderful, wonderful connective moments with the intelligence of my body sort of coming online in ways that I was like, again, I was just trying to clear like an anxiety or something. And then when you get this like total response, like that, this intuitive response from your body communicating with you, it's like, wow, okay, well, that is something that I need to pay attention to in the rest of my life too. It's if this can happen in this 20-minute session of me sitting on the floor, like when else can I tune into this awareness, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point. Because I think in a lot of these situations, we take out time and space to pay attention. We like schedule it into our day and then kind of forget about it, right? But like staying in touch and continuing to pay attention, in a lot of different contexts, like throughout your day and week, I think can be really powerful. And yeah, I think also Reiki taught me to pay attention kind of all the time, like whether I'm feeling anything or not, like I think it's really easy to only pay attention when something's wrong or like when you have a strong feeling. But yeah, like even paying attention when, it's just like very even keeled, nothing is really going on in your body. I think that's really important because you're staying in relationship, even when there's kind of like lower signals going on, and I think that's important for like kind of staying mindful and non-judgmental, at least for me, because then it's like, oh, if I do have a strong sensation, this is just one other event along, this longer line of events, which sometimes includes nothing at all. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of crossovers probably between like meditation and mindfulness practices and Reiki in that way.
Yeah, I so relate to that because I once, in the context of like a meditation, mentioned to a teacher, I was like, I'm speaking of piano, I was like, I have all treble notes and bass notes. I said, I have no middle of the piano, like emotionally is like how I feel sometimes. It's like everything is so extreme. And I was like, yeah, I want to like bring some of the like middle C back into my into my repertoire because it's like, yeah, the big emotions on opposite ends of the spectrum. It's like you can't live in those places all the time. Like you need to pay attention to that middle section and how things are still happening even if they don't feel as intense, and sort of acclimating your body to the point where you don't need those extremes to feel something anymore. I think there can be that addiction to those extremes that like because they make you feel something.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I want to give credit to Kelsey Blackwell, who I interview in the book, who's a cultural somatics practitioner in Oakland, and she has this amazing way of describing this, which is like basically building safety and trust in your body, by kind of seeing it as like a resource that you can depend on as well, like even in those moments where there's maybe less activity going on. It's sort of like an act of respect to do so. I just really love the way that she describes it in the book. Like, I think she does an amazing job, like better than I ever could of speaking to this. So I would point people to her interview as well. Right off the bat, if they're interested in this, they can kind of flip through and even just read that first. It's really, really great.
And I will be sure to link her information in the show notes too. When I put those up on my website, queenofpeaches.com, which is where, if you're listening, you're going to be able to find all that. And so I just want to like say that yeah, in addition to everything else that I love about this book, it's such a feminine book. It's such a femme book. And it's rare. I mean, that's actually one of the first writers who ever gave me that impression was Annie Dillard as well. Like that there's this womanly sort of sense, this femme sense. And so that's rare for me to find. Like, I feel like, I mean, maybe I'm just not reading enough femmes and need to address that in my reading habits, but it's valuable and it's so beautiful and it's so nurturing and healing to be in that space and have that voice in my head as I'm reading, to have your voice and just the way that you have sort of brought this information through that filter in a way where it lands very softly and very gently, but also really profoundly. So is that something that you're conscious of, like as a writer, or was that just sort of a happenstance of the kind of research that you were digging into, or was that just sort of a gift of that 3-year chunk of time when you were letting this kind of flow through you?
Well, that's really generous of you to say. I love that you got that from it, that it had that effect on you, because I don't think that was deliberate. Like, it really was just sort of, yeah, I mean, like the voice and tone I was most comfortable with, but I was also influenced by people like Audre Lorde, who's a poet and an activist, who did a lot of writing on the erotic and, this sense of like yourself, the beginnings of your sense of self, all the way to the chaos of your strongest feelings. Like, this is her definition of the erotic, and a very, very femme definition of being in the world. And so, yeah, I was definitely, I don't know. Yeah, maybe there were sort of some writers who were in this space who were like in the back of my head as I was writing it. But yeah, it really wasn't intentional. But I did want it to come across as not prescriptive in any way. I think gentle is a good word. Aside from the title, which is How to Change Your Body. But, I hope I hope people catch the irony in that, which is that, the point is everyone is individual, and ultimately, like, the power is in your hands to really decide like what feels right to you in your life. And yeah, maybe this is more of a feminine way to voice it, but I also don't really, I don't know, I don't really like draw that dichotomy in my mind either. And I think a lot of the book is actually very dense and scientific and almost masculine feeling in a way to me. So yeah, I don't know. I see like both textures in there, kind of like playing with the idea of science as this authority, this external authority, which can sometimes be a little bit patriarchal in a way. And then also, the tension between that and kind of like our subjective experience and trusting in the authority of that. And I think, topic wise, I was interested in exploring that, but maybe that also came through tonally. So I think, yeah, I really tried to explore both spaces, I would say.
Yeah, because I think that was like you say, the masculinity of the research and the sort of patriarchal tone that hard science writing and data can have. I think that was, I think, like I said, other pop science books that I've read, where they can take that and sort of merge with it. I think that was what struck me about, again, the way that you were using the research and integrating it throughout, was that it didn't end up feeling like this cold clinical sort of hammer, like you have to believe this information. It was really more sort of like, let the science be in service of what you're feeling in your body, and let the science be in service of whatever spiritual approach you might take to sort of, yeah, again, whether it's Reiki or meditation, and however it is that you understand yourself from within, letting the science serve that rather than wagging the dog in the other direction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That was for sure deliberate. I want people to take this and see it as potentially useful, and really just a starting point. Like, this is just scratching the surface. I think it's really important to know about the research, but everyone has a different body. We're all very individual. And I also really hope that people maybe are inspired to start talking about bodily experience a bit, like putting it into language, because I feel like this is sort of missing sometimes from conversation. We're like, right now we're sort of like talking theoretically about bodily experience, but we're not putting words to what we're actually feeling right here, like in this Zoom session,
Right.
And not everyone feels comfortable doing that. That's totally fine. But I think it's time to have a language for that, or at least try to make that a bigger priority, to try to put bodily experience into language, so that we can kind of understand that part of each other a little bit more clearly. And so hopefully, it really just kickstarts some discourse in that area, and maybe just gets people to think about things a little bit less abstractly, and really, kind of ask, like, what am I feeling, instead of how am I feeling, a little bit more often, which is something that Jen Murphy, who's an interoception researcher, she said this to me, that sort of sums it up to her, is like, what are you feeling? What is the concrete sensation? Can you put words to it before you even start categorizing it as a how? And I think that's a super important place to start. And now we breathe together.
And now we breathe, and I think that, again, as we're all bringing these abilities more online for ourselves, more integrated into our everyday awareness, I think that's so helpful for you to just remind us of that. Just be the little meditation bell going ding ding ding, like, feel what is it that you feel, like, just be with it. And just remembering to take that pause. So thank you for inviting that into our lives through this wonderful conversation, and through your wonderful book, and through all of your amazing research, and just through being a wonderful light out there, writing and sharing and finding the knowledge, and bringing it back for those of us mere mortals who are not reading the science literature in the way that you are.
I don't know. I mean, I may never fully recover from going as deep as I went down the rabbit hole, so have some battle wounds, I think, from the process. But also, I want to say thank you, Allison, for like ushering it into the world, because we're so intimately involved in it, and definitely like managed kind of my last minute sort of, changes that I threw your way with grace. And we're just like such an amazing person to work with in this whole process too. So huge thanks to Synergetic and you personally.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's, it's a joy. I love editing. I mean, I love writing. I love editing. Again, we talked about our Gemini. I'm Gemini rising, and it's a joy. And so to be able to use it in service of a book that's this good and this important is just makes the joy all that more profound. So I appreciate your appreciation of everything that went on behind the scenes. So this book is called How to Change Your Body, The Science of Interoception and Healing Through Connection to Yourself and Others by Saga Briggs, with a foreword by Julie Holland. And it's published by Synergetic Press, and it's officially out on Tuesday, September 19th, correct?
Yes, next week.
Next week.
Super exciting.
Let's get it together. So yeah, links to all of that will be in my show notes at queenofpeaches.com. And is there anything else you want to point people to? What do you got coming up next? Where can people find you online if they want to read everything you've ever written now?
Let's see. Yeah, so I'm on Twitter for as long as that exists.
Right.
Yeah, at Saga Milena. So that's my first name and then Milena. And on LinkedIn, actually, that's the best place to find all of my articles linked to in one spot. So you can find me, just look up Saga Briggs on LinkedIn, and you can read article links to writings for Scientific American, and the Aeon+Psyche article is on there, and a bunch of others that are related to this topic, some Psychedelic Science articles as well. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, those two places. Also on Instagram, but I'm more of a words person, a Gemini, so I'm kind of more where the chatting is happening on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Where the text can flow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about the book and to connect with me here today, Saga. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Allison. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of I'll Follow You. Don't forget that you can always find show notes over on my website, queenofpeaches.com. Links to and for previous episodes are listed there as well. While you're there, I hope you might find another episode that strikes your fancy. All my recordings are assembled in my home studio using the free open-source cross-platform editing software Audacity. I use a Logitech G Snowball Ice microphone and Shure SRH 440 professional studio headphones. The theme music is from the song Without You, written by Brian Cremens and performed by the band 1000. This podcast is made possible by the fact that I work a full-time job, am happily married, and don't have any children. That's what really goes on behind the scenes of this artistic life.